Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today we're thinking about power and conflict poetry for AQA GCSE English Literature, and I'm going to be providing some analysis for Checking Out Me History. Okay, Checking Out Me History by John Agard, an absolutely fantastic poem. And there's an image there of Mary Seacole, who's a historical figure that features in the poem. Okay, here's the poem in front of you. Feel free to read this if you want to, but I do recommend listening to John Agard read the poem himself. It's about his own experiences of his education and his identity, so it's definitely worthwhile listening to him read the poem. You can find that by searching for that on YouTube, but you can also find that on the BBC iPlayer. Definitely worth listening to John Agard read the poem aloud himself. Okay, so if we're given this poem to write about in the exam, or if it's one that you want to use to compare to the named poem, the first thing we need to do is show the examiner that we understand what the poem's about. Now, in a nutshell, this is John Agard raging about his experience of education and the fact that he didn't learn black history at school, and he didn't get to really feel proud of his own people's identity and history because of that. So it's a really interesting poem in that sense. It's got a lot of anger and frustration that's communicated in it. And in front of you here, we've got an example of me explaining concisely what the poem's about. So the first part of our response, first paragraph, we're going to link the two poems that we've chosen to the theme in the question. So I've done that here for Checking Out Me History. Checking Out Me History is a poem about John Agard's feelings towards his education. He's angered by the fact he didn't learn anything significant about black history. He feels he was deterred from exploring his own identity and the proud history of his people, which he is baffled by considering how much meaningless learning he did when he was at school. So that's pretty much what the poem is about. It's a critique of his own experiences of education, and he interestingly contrasts a lot of the trivial nonsense that he did manage to learn at school with the achievements of historical black figures in the poem. Now, the second thing that I need to do in my response is show that I understand the structures of them. So before I head on to analysing language, I'm going to show that I understand form and structure and how that is effective for both of the poems that I'm writing about. So here I've done that for Checking Out Me History. So the use of couplets in the poem is effective in giving the poem a persuasive and assertive tone. And because the poem's about identity, Agard wants us to hear his voice throughout the poem, which is why he writes phonetically, ignoring the ideological constraints of standard English. He rages against the norm in this poem, which is why he breaks grammatical rules throughout. So I've been able to explore a little bit of the form and structure of the poem and link it to the intended effects that the writer wants to have. To write phonetically, it means that you spell words the way they sound. So that's what John Agard opts for, so that we can really hear his voice. And because that's a poem about identity, he's able to really express himself in that way. In front of you, you've got a flashcard for Checking Out Me History, and I've chosen 4 quotes that I think are worth knowing and remembering and being able to call upon if this is the named poem. You may have analysed every single line, and that's meaningful, but at the same time, you're only going to be writing about 3 or 4 quotes for each of the poems in the time you've got. You've got about 45 minutes. Once you've explained what the poems are about and how they link to the question, and you've explored structure for each of them, you're only going to be writing about 3 or 4 references to each of the texts. So here are 4 lines from the poem that are worth knowing for the exam. So we've got a yellow sunrise to the dying. That's a metaphor that Agard uses to describe Mary Seacole. And it's really interesting that he talks about her being a yellow sunrise. The fact that Mary Seacole is a black historical figure is significant, but the fact that he chooses to describe her as yellow here almost sort of emphasises the idea that we should learn about Mary Seacole's achievements simply because she's an inspirational historical figure and not out of sympathy. We've got her as a healing star among the wounded. The idea of her being a star here in this line is a really interesting metaphor, because a star is something that guides us. And maybe this reflects the idea that Mary Seacole and her achievements and his learning about her achievements has helped to guide him to feel differently about himself. We've got this metaphor here about his experiences of education. Bandage up me eye with my own history. Now, the idea of being bandaged has got allusions to being injured and harmed, but we've also got ideas of being blinded here. which is, violent in its own right, but at the same time sort of alludes to ideas of not being able to see yourself and explore your own identity with pride. We've got them tell me about the dish ran away with the spoon. One of the things that John Agard does really effectively in the poem is he contrasts historical achievements of black historical figures with nonsense and nursery rhymes that he did learn in school, making the point that if there was time to learn about the dish ran away with the spoon and old King Cole was a merry old soul, how is it that there isn't enough time in our education to be able to spend a lot more time focusing on the achievements of black historical figures? Okay, if you want to take your revision further, here's a few things you can do. So can you recall what the poem's about and what the themes are that are explored in it? Can you explain the effect of the structure of the poem and try and use some key terms as you do? And can you recall 4 key quotes and analyse them? Try and do that yourself, but if you can't manage to recall those from the time that you spent watching this video, do go back and then revisit those key moments and then make sure that you can provide them on a flashcard for yourself without looking. Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content, and feel free to ask for something you'd like to see me cover in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and keep revising.